Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, I just had a very, very important conversation, and we are in a time of profound anxiety. While I'm very, very excited that August 15th, we're kind of gathering back together. Westover's been doing it for a couple weeks, and I can't tell you what a remedy that has been to my soul. But I think it's really important right now to focus on the point of community. The reason why I'm dressed like this, as I already mentioned, is because I literally just finished mowing the lawn. But also, one of the important points about community is if we're not accepting each other at our lowest points, the impact, the importance of our community is greatly diminished. We are supposed to be there to celebrate when others in our community celebrate. We are there to mourn when other people mourn. We're there to do and support and love people when they do things that maybe isn't really aligned with our worldview. We know this sort of stuff. We are to be and to embrace others when they are not polished, not looking good. And if ever there was an age where that was more important, I don't know what that age would be. That sentence almost got away from me, but I think that makes sense. But I want to talk about something, and I can't believe I haven't sort of referenced this before because I spend so much time in my other job as a professor at the university dealing with this sort of stuff, and I think it's really important to talk about the anxiety of this age because it's not by accident. There's many real things that are happening with health concerns, with mental health issues, with people feeling overwhelmed, isolated, cut off, with medical procedures that are necessary that have been bumped to the back because of COVID. And on top of all that, we are in the midst of an onslaught, a campaign of misinformation that I really think it's important for us to address because this campaign of misinformation is based completely on instilling and creating fear and dissension. Now, this is going to sound weird, but for those of you listening, you are actually being targeted by unforeseen forces. And that seems like an odd thing to start off a message that I'm hoping ultimately will be about hope. But I think you need to understand some of the things that are going on in the technological realm, which is kind of a weird departure for what it is that we normally talk about, but I think is really important to address. Now, you're watching this online. And let's be honest, most of the information we get these days comes from internet sources. And therein lies a very serious concern. And what I believe community can be a very important antidote for. There are groups, small collections of people, and then larger collections of programmers that some of them are insidious. Some of them it's just sort of an unforeseen or uncontrollable consequence of the digital age in which we live. A digital age none of us have ever experienced before. And let's face it, if you're not born in the late 90s, we are immigrants to this digital age. We don't fully understand, it's not our native language. We've had to learn a lot of stuff, for example, just to be able to watch my face online. But there are people who gather up information. They gather up misinformation as well, and they send it off. It's almost like a high-tech version of the game telephone. But included in this, not just like a group of people, you whisper, and everybody laughs because the message by the end of the group is completely different than the message that started it. Yeah, that's one element. But within this are almost loudspeakers that intentionally distort information and blast it out over a large collection. So imagine your game of telephone is taking place inside of a football stadium, a packed football stadium of 35,000 people. And one of you whispers 2, 3, 4, okay, it's going along kind of silly, but still basically connected. Then one person with a loudspeaker yells out information that they are purposely skewing, purposely changing, or just sort of accidentally getting wrong. So that all those other 35 to 50,000 people in the stadium, that's all they hear. And then it goes through a couple other people individually, and then another person with a loudspeaker takes the even more convoluted message and blasts that out again. This is kind of a poor analogy, but somewhat of an analogy of what's going on in the internet in this day and age. There's these things called bots, and you get this information into it, and it blasts them out predominantly over social media like Facebook. I don't think too many of you are on this, but Instagram, TikTok, whatever these different social media platforms are. And the thing is, once they're picked up by people on Facebook and they start to spread them out, it grows exponentially. So what started as a fairly small, isolated, niche, and ultimately conspiracy element theory finds its way to the mainstream, usually within a day or two. And once it's crossing people's Facebook pages and you're starting to forward this thing on, then millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions possibly are starting to spread this information. And herein lies the other weird element that we're not necessarily used to, is now the news agencies, the legitimate news agencies from countries all around the world, CBC, CNN, Fox News, Al Jazeera, BBC, etc., pick these things up because we are in the time of the 24-hour news cycle. And that further legitimizes a lot of these messages around fears around the vaccine. Now, we know that with vaccines, there's always side effects, and some of us have had some personal experience with that, but these things get conflagrated. They get blown up. This becomes a conspiracy where multiple pharmaceutical companies, tens of thousands of medical professionals are all in on some grand global conspiracy. All sorts of different stuff. And this needs to be addressed because I really want to speak to you. Because there's a lot of good research that shows for those who are older, you're actually targeted. You're targeted with fear-filled messages about not just COVID, not just vaccine, but stuff about other religions, about other countries taking over, about these insidious, unknown organizations that are working just beneath the surface and derailing us. There's a lot of fear out there. And why would somebody do that? Fear makes money. In this day and age, being an influencer is capital, is a way to make money. Being able to influence the culture is literally a job. In its most shallow, benign ways, it's a bunch of young people sort of showing their makeup tricks and tips, clothing, fashion, music, etc. I have friends who make films and they get picked up, and so now car companies and others are trying to pick them up to bring their brand to this underground of the internet, because the internet has usurped and overshot and surpassed the television as the main realm of influence. And that's the sort of benign, shallow ways in which influencing works. And a lot of these people make insane amounts of money. Insane. Full-on celebrities, even if we don't necessarily, those of us who aren't really involved in the internet as much, we may not necessarily know who they are, but they are making a crazy amount of money because they have a crazy amount of influence. The more diabolical end is that influence towards fear about certain people groups, about certain government institutions. Always good to be critical of people groups and government institutions, especially to make sure that we're not getting sold something. I said people groups and then I don't really mean people groups. I'm just thinking more governments. But now it's gone so far the other way because this fear mongering creates a culture that is very beneficial to a small collection of people. Now, this sounds conspiratorial, and I understand that. But again, there's a lot of research being put into people purposely putting out mixed messages and fear-filled messages. And I know a lot of us are trapped in that because the other element of it comes from these things called algorithms. Now, an algorithm is just math. It's not insidious. There's no moral equality. It's just math. But what an algorithm does is it helps you navigate the unbelievable amount of information on the internet in ways that are most beneficial to you, which is why if you buy a certain product, you're going to get a lot of similar products all of a sudden popping up. If you share posts that do really well and have a lot of people responding to them, the algorithm notes that, and other posts that you may share that aren't as popular, it will start to show that to less and less people. And posts that are similar to the ones that were popular, it's going to show to more and more people to enhance your ability to influence your various spheres, your various circles of influence. Influence your circles of influence? Yeah. So the internet that we're all looking at, it's not a neutral, just a collection of information you can go through. It's actually targeted information. So the more you look into certain topics, especially fear-filled topics, the more your internet only shows you that. The more we communicate fear-filled topics, the more the internet only allows us as individuals to communicate similar messages. This seems like a weird thing to talk about on a Sunday, but I think it's really important because it's very easy to get trapped into a world where we think we're doing our research, where we think we're getting unbiased opinions, and we're not. And it's not because there's some small, Illuminati kind of group that's controlling us. There are people who do well by influencing based on fear. But more importantly, the algorithms that are at the backdrop of all of our internet are doing the same things from a much more morally neutral base, because again, it's just math. So we can't sort of track and be like, oh, listen to what these people are doing, don't listen to what these people are doing. Although, to be honest, if it's anything that's tied to QAnon, do not listen. And so I've seen in this past year and a half, it is subtle. It's like water wearing on rock. It's not overnight, it's over time. We've all spent a lot more time online in the past year and a half. We're sort of exploring this stuff. And even for those of us who don't, who watch like the nightly news, we're not in the Walter Cronkite days anymore. Journalism is different. Journalism, like anything else, needs to pay. And they chase and there's money to be made in offering divisive opinions. Having an identity that is very political, where the bias is clear and they become the champions of certain perspectives. There is billions to be made in that. And so even those of us who maybe watch the news more are still finding ourselves in the same cycle of information, and that can be very compelling as well as very scary. So, what do we do with this terrifying collection of information? It's a very simplistic, overly simplified version of what's going on. But I do want this to be ultimately a message of hope. And this is why I think community is so important. A community that allows your minister to be wearing a janky baseball hat in sweaty clothes from just mowing the lawn, because I want us to be able to sit on the lawn and just be with each other. Left to our own devices, left alone, as many of us have been for this past year and a half, things can get dark and weird and scary quickly. As Christians, as a community that is based solely on following and worshiping Jesus, I want us to elevate ourselves and recognize that we are elevated above the noise and the fear and the terror that this world is so prone to just offer to us in bucket loads. Because fear is profitable. Fear is scary. It gets people angry and turned in out of a desire to protect ourselves. It appeals to our most base human nature, the very thing that Jesus taught us to ignore, to combat, to look to him as an example to beat fear. Not with weapons, not with mean words, not with vitriol, not with exclusionary, not with just like, I'm just going to take care of my own and everybody else can off. None of that. Jesus models that. And in his time, in his day and age, and as a historian, I can relate to this, there is always times of fear and concern. This world has always been chaotic and scary and violent. We think of the earthquake in Haiti and the poverty that land is already inflicted with, and how are they ever possibly going to get back from this? And we are destroyed. We think of the wildfires in Western Canada. We think of the ongoing fear of COVID-19. We know about the increases in domestic abuse. We can think of child trafficking. In Canada, we are going to wrestle with and need to wrestle with the ongoing legacy of the residential schools. All these things are overwhelming and terrifying and can fill us with fear and cripple us and paralyze us. As a community dedicated to Jesus, we need to be there for each other, to honor each other's fears, but to never allow each other to dwell in them. And to that end, I turn your attention to Jesus himself, who teaches us in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24, beginning in verse 6. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation. Kingdom will rise against kingdom. There will be famines. There will be earthquakes in various places. But dear children, all of these are just the beginnings of the birth pains. You will be handed over. You will be persecuted. Some will be put to death. You will be hated because of me. And at that time, many will turn away from the faith. They will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But the one the one who stands firm to the end, will be saved. Whatever church is going to look like in these days going forward, I honor and I hear your fear. I honor and I hear your concerns. I honor and I hear your absolute terror of what the days to come, and your fear that even when COVID's behind us, we're not through this yet. And I say to you, yes, that is likely the case. Historically speaking, that is likely the case. Let us lean on each other. None of us should be going through this alone. And let us find our strength, not in our own abilities to rationalize this, not in our own abilities to come up with the most adequate and thoughtful internet researches, but let's unplug and be together in the real world and lean on each other and lean on the words of Jesus. The world will be chaotic. The world will be dark. Wickedness will grow. Love will grow cold. But dear brothers and sisters, faith families of Mountsburg and Westover and beyond, we exist to hold each other up so that we will stand firm to the end. Be bastions of light and peace and hope and calm in dark and turbulent days. We are blessed to have lived long enough to see these days. Let us use the time given to us wisely and in service to Christ and in honoring of the gospel that he gave all to proclaim. Amen, amen, and amen.